that the hydrogen economy is one of the biggest and the most significant opportunities for South Africa. Never in the history of post-apartheid South Africa has there been such a platform presented to our country to transform the socio-economic structures of our society for the better. Through the hydrogen economy, the country has the opportunity to address several challenges it is facing, all at the same time. The challenge of energy security, of economic development, of economic transformation, and climate change. And you will be delighted to know that South Africa has the goodwill of the global community who are encouraging us to transform our economy to hydrogen. The question is, will we as South Africans rise to the occasion?
I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this hydrogen economy Indaba.
On behalf of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, the DTIC, it's a great pleasure to provide a keynote address at this very important event. I believe that with collaboration between the relevant social partners, it is possible to convene this Indaba annually to provide guidance and support to the country's efforts to become one of the leading countries in the hydrogen economy. Global momentum is growing across the hydrogen industry, with few sectors likely to remain untouched by this upcoming energy revolution.
About electricity, you use electricity to bring about chemical reactions, or you are using chemical reaction to bring about electricity. Our hydrogen economy describes that for us very well. So this is the reason why we are here today, because both electrolyzer system and fuel cell systems all require electrocatalysts that drive these two systems are found in South Africa. They are all platinum group metals. That is why we are quite excited about the hydrogen economy.
Gauteng's position is unique as an economic and industrial hub. We already have massive intellectual and industrial capacity to develop, to produce and deploy green hydrogen domestically in our industries, in our transport systems, and in our smart city developments. We also have in our plans and are in the process of doing all this, the development of a network of special economic zones and smart cities, that these are smart cities of the future, whose energy source and economies will have to be green and smart.
Then it's not an issue. Our understanding is that we need to have long-term plans. If we know that by next year or in 2 years' time, we are going to stop a mine or we are going to stop a power station, we better then start to make some proper plannings now that in the 12 months or 24 months, we will then have created a plan as to how do we reskill and upskill the workers that are working there. But you must understand that some of these issues don't only affect workers who are working, they also affect the communities. Like in the mines, you have got the social labor plans. Part of the social labor plans is for the employers, particularly the mines, to do certain issues in the community. You'll find that community people are suppliers in the mine, but you must also know that there is a lot of construction workers who are doing maintenance also during the operations of a mine. All those issues needs to be done within a period of time.
I therefore see the hydrogen economy as a story of hope. A hope for a new world with low emissions, a hope for a disruptive but necessary change, a hope for a new industry and sustainable jobs. For this hope to become reality, we have to focus on preparing our country to be a significant global player in the hydrogen economy through developing the necessary knowledge and skills in the hydrogen and fuel cell technology space.
So what do we need to do differently to create that scale and speed? And maybe I could start, Diksha, with you from a sort of new world, new skills, and as a person who consults on these things with corporates and organizations and even at government level.
Yeah.
What would your suggestions be of how we speed up and scale up?
We cannot try to reach that 2040 baseline or aspiration if we don't plan properly. And again, it goes back, I think it was mentioned through all of the talks today, about private sector, public sector, the government and the institutions, basic and higher education, working together. Because if I can tell you, just from a strategic workforce planning perspective or planning scenarios, you cannot just rely on private sector or higher education or government to do it in isolation. We won't get it right.
We collaborate. We have to partner with international colleagues that are in the business for us to do that, because there is no, tell me what you are doing today that you think you can do better without collaboration. And we have always had this proverb. They say it is an African proverb. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, then you must work with other people.
What are the strategic issues that have emerged out of today's discussion? The first thing is that the hydrogen economy is an ownership greenfield, and we need to make sure that that greenfield we protect it for South Africa. The second one, the hydrogen economy is an opportunity for South Africa to start a sustainable and resilient energy future. The third is that the strategic issue is that the hydrogen economy will mitigate our current grid reliability challenges. Four, it is also another strategic issue is that the hydrogen economy is a proven job creator, as it is an industry on its own.
As an industry, this is what we would like to see covered in the Green Paper. We want the Green Paper to clearly spell out what the future with green hydrogen would look like by understanding its value chain and how its flexibility allows it to play a role in all sectors of our economy. We envisaged methods of hydrogen production, storage and transportation, and technology innovations that are required to drive down the cost by 80% come 2035. Incentives and capital costs that are required to make green hydrogen economically viable in South Africa to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Africa has abundant resources and highly skilled people to unlock prospects for investment in building a brand new economy in green hydrogen.
This is, in my view, our moment. This is our time. This is the time, a time to rally around each other for our common good and the good of all life on planet Earth. We need to take advantage and transform this opportunity into tangible benefits, jobs, skills, and entrepreneurial opportunities for the bulk of our country's citizens.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this fourth episode of the Hydrogen Economy in Indaba. My name is Samson Mampieli. I'm a professor at Stellenbosch University. I'm also director at the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies. There can never be a better time for us to have discussions that we're going to have than this time when we have our system very much constrained. I just came out of an interview with SAFM this morning where we were talking about the energy challenges that the country is facing with the ESCOM announcing stage 4 load shedding, preparing for the elections. trying to build some reserves so that at least we have free and fair elections. I see the hydrogen economy as being one of the key sectors that will assist the country going forward in terms of sustainability, security of supply, economic development, as well as the key focus area of job creation. As we all know, most of our young people who are looking for jobs can't find jobs. So there will be a lot of opportunities that comes with the hydrogen economy as it may. And as South Africa, we do have the necessary resources that can put us in the forefront of producing green hydrogen, as well as the producing the various technologies that are associated with the hydrogen economy. So what we're going to do now is for the next 10 minutes or so, we will be looking at, we'll be going through an overview where we're looking at what will be the expectations from the various people who are in attendance. I want to welcome specifically our guests, Nomfundo, Dina, and Mita and Olympus, as well as Mr. Ramano, who are on the program today. Welcome, colleagues, and I'm looking forward to an interactive session with you and the rest of the people in attendance. So we're now going to go to the overview. For the next 10 minutes or so, we'll be dealing with expectations. Okay, thank you to the technical team. So the question that we have to face in the next 10 minutes or so is, what are your expectations for today? So we looking at things such as the forging of collaborations, commitments, the hydrogen policy. You know, what do you expect in terms of the hydrogen policy? What do you expect in terms of the commitments from the various sectors, starting with national government and provincial governments? You've seen the premier who was talking about some of these things. Okay, I see something coming up, learning and exploration. Those are some of the things. I see commitment coming out very clear, or leading. So we'll be waiting for more. I see commitments still top of the list. And I see some implementation that's also coming through. Okay. So for me, I expect almost all of that. The commitments, the policy, implementation part of things, high my priority also is collaborations or network. It's important for people to collaborate and face the hydrogen economy as a collective going forward. Another speaker said it that if you want to walk far, walk with others. If you want to walk close, walk alone. Okay, so I see on top of the list is commitments. And thank you, colleagues, for all that. I'm going to move with the program and call our first speaker, who is Ms. Nomfundo Maseti from the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. Nomfundo is responsible for the economic regulation of the gas industry, and she serves in other committees that take regulatory decisions on matters related to petroleum and electricity subcommittees at NERSA. She is also a member of the National Consumer Tribunal, which adjudicates on consumer protection matters. She has 20 years experience in competition law enforcement and economic regulation. She has held various positions at the Department of Trade and Industry. She holds a BA honors degree in economics and a postgraduate diploma in economics for competition law. Over to you, Nomfundo.
Prof, I'm not sure how we are supposed to start, whether I should be providing an overview or I'm going to project any presentation. I just want to understand how are we supposed to do it.
Hi, Nomfundo. Your presentation is up on screen. If you can just please proceed and we will guide the presentation for you. If you can just tell us when to move on to the next slide, please.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you again for inviting me to participate in this session. And I'm going to share our views at this stage and just to share the regulatory framework. Just to start off by saying that in terms of the key messages, if we can go to the next slide, maybe the next two slides, I'll shoot straight to the key messages. That's just the outline. To the key messages. In terms of the key messages, I would like to just share with you that so far we are observing, the interest that is increasing on hydrogen as a potential for economic growth in terms of its contribution and also the cleanness of this energy carrier. So yes, NERSA, we believe that it has a vital role towards decarbonization and also just contributing to the energy security, as you indicated earlier on, Prof. Just to indicate that in terms of the Gas Act that we administer at NERSA, hydrogen is one of the gas sources that we regulate. So it is part of the current regulatory framework, and it can be irrespective of the technology, whether it is transported through the pipeline and also in storage. So it does cover the hydrogen-rich gas, and it also includes the licensing of the hydrogen as the hydrogen infrastructure, as well as approval of tariffs. I think also maybe what will need to be looked at is in terms of the green hydrogen, depending how that is going to be framed, so that we can then look at the adequacy of the current regulatory framework to regulate the green hydrogen. But so far, with the other types of hydrogen, they are all covered, and even we believe that the green hydrogen is covered, but we need to see perhaps what are some of the regulatory gaps once we understand how it is going to be done from the policy viewpoint. We also believe that the current regulated framework, there is room to improve on it and ensure that it will facilitate entry, investments basically, and also the participation by the BEEs. So whilst there's a lot of talk about green hydrogen, we also think that perhaps the debate must not just be confined to green hydrogen. Let us also look at the potential of this energy carrier without confining ourselves in terms of the market for hydrogen in South Africa, confining ourselves to green hydrogen. Let us also look at the other forms such as grey and blue hydrogen, and also the availability of the resource so that it can deal with our energy problems, and look at those other sources as part of the solution, other than to just have preference on green hydrogen. So I can move on to the next slide. We just share with you some of the 5 common policy drivers to consider hydrogen. And we also looked at various countries, as the team at NERSA is busy doing some research just to check some of the approaches in different countries from the regulatory point of view and policy issues, so that we also keep up to date with international best practice. So you will see that those common drivers is about clean energy to reduce carbon emissions. It is also looked at as a potential for energy security, and to diversify the sources of energy so that we do away with the risk, or ameliorate the risk that we have encountered also in South Africa as we speak. So it is also looked at as part of the integrated renewable energy, and also to foster economic growth, as I indicated earlier on, as well as to support the national hydrogen technology development and attain technology leadership. So we believe that there is that scope, but we do not know yet in our country what the policy drivers will be. But we were just sharing what is happening out there. Thank you. If we can move on to the next one quickly. So this is about just the role as we see it, the role of hydrogen, which is to enable the large-scale renewable energy integration and power generation, and also providing a clean feedstock for the industry. And we think that it has a great potential in driving the decarbonization agenda, also in these sectors like transport, as well as in industrial sectors. But also it does have a vital role in terms of heating and power generation. And it will also ensure that there's distribution of energy across the key sectors of the economy and the region. And I think we should acknowledge the availability of this resource, which must now be considered and monetized. And NERSA is there to actually facilitate any investments, as we are required to do so in terms of our legislation. So hydrogen is abundant, is versatile, and it can be used as an energy carrier or as industrial feedstock. Also, hydrogen can provide long-term solution to carbon-free economy around the world, and it can be produced also from fossil fuel as well as non-fossil fuels. So hence I made a point earlier on that perhaps when we start opening up the market for hydrogen, would it be the right approach to simply have preference instead of letting the market to develop on its own, so that we can see what this energy carrier can do, its potential, rather than confining it to one. So we also think that hydrogen can help decarbonize hard to electrify sectors such as marine, transport and aviation, as well as heavy industries. Can move on to the next slide. This slide is not so clear, but I'm not going to dwell on it. We're just showing the 3 stages of hydrogen, and also the various forms of transporting hydrogen, the markets where hydrogen can be utilized, as well as NERSA's jurisdiction, again, just to map it out. What is it that we are required to do in terms of the Act for hydrogen? So it means the licensing and as well as the tariffs, but also since hydrogen can be transported via pipelines, one could also look at the existing gas pipelines, the extent to which they can facilitate the introduction of the hydrogen into our economy. So if that can also be a consideration. I know that this is still a debate in other countries, such as the EU, just to look at the potential of the current pipeline, the extent to which it can be utilized, because it's an infrastructure that is already there in terms of introducing hydrogen into the economy. So this is just the slide that talks to that, and also just talking to how hydrogen can be transported and what are the key markets for hydrogen. I can move on to the next slide. Thank you. This slide, I think I've already again touched a bit, but it is now nicely summarized here so that you can get a better sense of the role of NERSA in regulating hydrogen. So it will be first of all to facilitate investments by way of licensing the hydrogen infrastructure. So in terms of licensing, we would license the construction, whether it's construction of pipeline, any technology that is going to, that will need a construction. And also we would have to issue the operation license. Say, for instance, there's a technology that does not necessarily need construction, or it may well be that it's a mobile technology. So we will then license the operation of that that technology to enable the transportation and distribution of hydrogen, as well as issuing trading licenses. We will also register the activity, the production of hydrogen, or if it's going to be imported, we will also have to register that. So it means there must be an application for registration that is therefore submitted to NERSA. The third thing that you need to note, again, this part about the third-party access, I think you will then have to understand it from a viewpoint of pipelines being a natural monopoly, and therefore having a regulator to then try to constrain the market power there. But also, I think the strategic objective of allowing other third parties to have access on that essential infrastructure, it is to make sure that we regulate for inclusivity, we regulate for transformation, and we believe that hydrogen could also, once it is introduced in the economy, it must contribute to such objectives of ensuring inclusive energy sector in South Africa. So we will therefore enforce third-party access into the critical infrastructure that cannot be easily duplicated, so that there's transformation, there's participation in the economy by other small entities, and also ensuring inclusivity. So we think that it has that potential, and it could also be the policy imperative that drives the introduction of the hydrogen into the economy. So other functions are just to do compliance and also to regulate prices as well as tariffs. Can move on to the next slide. This slide we're just sharing is just for your benefit, as I indicated earlier on, that because we have taken a key interest in this area and to keep up with developments in other countries and in other regulatory authorities. So we have noted that there are about 20 countries that have released hydrogen roadmaps and strategies. So we need to ask ourselves what initiatives have we taken in our country, in South Africa, at least from the policy point of view, to start also looking into this energy. And also just in other countries, and it's still a debate, by the way, as to whether this should just be a focus on green hydrogen. Obviously, developing countries, some of them, they are looking at not just focusing on green hydrogen, but other forms of hydrogen. So that is still a debate, but I think it must also be driven by our own needs and policy objectives, so that there's no sort of constraint and close the market right from the beginning. So I think let us try to explore the potential of this energy carrier rather than just confine it. 228 hydrogen projects have been announced, and then 85% of global projects, they originate from Europe as well as Asia and Australia. And those actually include renewable hydrogen projects as well as industrial projects and infrastructure development. And I must also emphasize the point that I made earlier, that there is still also a favorable debate regarding the use of the gas pipelines, to assist in terms of enrolling this energy carrier into the economy, because the infrastructure is already there. So can it be repurposed to also be used for introducing hydrogen into the economy? We can move on to the next slide. This is just to share maybe the thinking around integrating hydrogen into the mainstream economy, strategies to be considered to integrate the hydrogen activities in the mainstream may include perhaps the blending hydrogen to existing natural gas pipeline in order to assist the storage as well as transportation. I've already indicated and emphasized that point throughout in terms of looking at the existing infrastructure. How can it assist in introducing this energy source and to repurpose the existing natural gas network to transport pure hydrogen, and also to combine gas combustion with a carbon capture storage by retrofitting the CCS technology in gas-fired power plants to reduce the amount of carbon emissions. So this again, it puts an emphasis on the earlier point about not just looking at the green hydrogen, but let us look also on the grey and the blue one, because there is a resource also in South Africa for that, and therefore just then look into the technology that can deal with the concern of the carbon emissions. So I think that the bullet point is talking to that. And then also to look into the scaling up of production of biogas and biomethane, which are carbon neutral gases, in order to displace natural gas in some markets. So this is how other countries are looking at in terms of integrating hydrogen into the mainstream of the economy. And there's also sector coupling. And I think those are some of the debates, and I'm hoping that we are not stopping today. These kind of events must continue so that we can contribute even into the sort of the policy direction, and perhaps the issue of the sector coupling. It can be something that you may actually want to look at and get views of the industry in terms of that, and have a focused session on the potential for sector coupling, and what is it that you may want to consider, and get industry experts to talk to that issue of sector coupling and the potential of doing that. I think that will be also a good thing to look at, perhaps as a follow-up session later on. I think it will contribute greatly to this debate. Thank you. If you can move on to the next one. This is just to share also internationally, as I've shared, what is it that we can do in South Africa, but also to just give you a sense of where other countries are in terms of the regulation of hydrogen. So developments globally are still very young. They're still at the infant stage in certain countries, although they're gaining momentum because some are developing policies, plans, strategies, and so forth, so that they can start looking at this hydrogen as an energy carrier that has a great potential. So there is no solid regulatory framework, even in Europe, as I indicated, that they were still looking at various options and initiatives leading to, there are regulatory frameworks in place in markets leading the hydrogen debate. However, options that have been considered include to adapt the existing gas regulatory framework to accommodate and facilitate deployment of hydrogen technologies. What this means is other countries, they have an established regulatory framework to regulate gas, for instance. Now, the debate is whether or not they should build on this regulatory framework that is in existence. To the extent that it has some gaps, is not sufficient to do what the policy or to fit the policy intention. If it's not sufficient, perhaps one can then improve that, or to have a standalone regulatory framework for hydrogen. So there is no conclusion on this debate, and it will depend on a country by country basis. So there's also development of new hydrogen sector-specific regulatory frameworks. So it all depends on the approaches that each country would like to follow. So I've already summarized that, so I can move on to the next slide. This is just by way of example. So here, I'm not going to dwell on it. It's just to share on the different technologies that are being used, and then also some that actually have high cost and inefficiency. So we just need to pay attention to that, so that even when you probably want to give input into the policy debate and policy implications, you are aware of some of those things, and you can suggest some solutions to address some of these concerns. So we just sharing that kind of information. And also look into the lock-in effect, where hydrogen said to compete with established fossil fuel technologies, and then and thus driving displacement of the other fossil fuels. But let us just look at what our country needs, and what is the policy position, and what is it that the country wants to do with the hydrogen, what its role is going to be in the economy. I think those things are quite important, and this information is just meant to assist in that debate, so that we can see how it can fit nicely to the policy imperatives of our country. We can move on to the next slide. This is just, again, you'll recall that Sasol Gas used to supply hydrogen in South Africa, so it's not the first time that we consider this energy carrier in South Africa. So here we are just sharing the public concerns around the safety, and that is also just the perception. So I think there will need to be awareness campaigns or initiatives regarding the safety of hydrogen, and also in the way that it is going to be transported. I think that is very important, that the public needs to be informed about that. So it's one of those things that we cannot ignore, and also to make sure that the consumer protection laws are going to be complied with. So in terms of just making sure that the public is aware when they have to utilize this energy source or energy carrier. I think it's better to call it energy carrier because it's not a primary energy source. All right, so this is just to indicate that there should be some in the debates that are gonna be developing now. It's important that you will also pay attention to the issues of safety, including the safety, technical safety standards, and developing the industry norms, and so that all of these perceptions and concerns will then be addressed. So I think that's another aspect to consider as we go along with these debates. I can move on to the next slide. So it is a new area of development, and therefore South Africa has an opportunity, as we think that it does, to develop a robust and an all-inclusive hydrogen strategy that will not stifle innovation and deprive the country of the opportunity to create sustainable pathway towards the clean energy transition. It's an emphasis. I think this one, it says it all. And we think also that there is an opportunity for to set a policy and regulatory framework that will strike a balance between protecting the existing investments as well as gradually adapting the industry to the new realities of clean energy transition, and also create the regulatory roadmap in parallel with the country's hydrogen society roadmap, as well as to develop hydrogen regulatory framework that is innovative, flexible, and can be easily adapted to evolve with the market. It emphasizes the first point and the messages that I've emphasized right at the beginning, so that you don't, when you introduce a new product into the market, you don't want to lock the market. So you want to see how the market can develop on its own, and also the opportunities that come with that, and also to learn or to have some lessons on how to improve on failed transformation policies from other subsectors of the energy industry. So we think that we have an opportunity to improve. So what should be avoided? Preference and reliance on green hydrogen. It's an emphasis. I'm not going to dwell on that. Also, influence of lobbying antics to drive certain policy agenda in support of specific sector. There's a potential benefit for the country, and inclusive development should take the center stage in the development of the hydrogen economy. I emphasized as well what our role as NERSA will be in terms of third-party access in order to contribute to the objective of inclusivity, economic participation, as well as transformation through the third-party access. And we must also avoid silo approach towards the development of hydrogen policies and regulations. That we've explained it in those two bullet points. I can move on to the next slide. Facilitation of entry, diversity, inclusive growth, the market entry strategies that may be considered is the upstream JVs, the cooperation that you've spoken about earlier on, the partnerships that you have spoken about earlier on. We think that, yes, there could be joint venture participation where the black-owned companies become equity partners in the production of hydrogen. Also, midstream joint ventures have a potential through the transportation infrastructure, as well as distribution. Remember, these are the areas that we regulate at NERSA, and we're just unpacking, just to be much more realistic and to just simplify, the intention of regulating those sectors. We think that there's a role as well for strategic alliances and partnership with strong international hydrogen companies who are looking for green hydrogen export opportunities. And hydrogen mobility is the likely opportunity for direct entry to develop new markets for hydrogen. So in terms of policy, regulatory measures to consider, the hydrogen strategy and policies should set a clear and measurable objectives. Also take into consideration the issue of inclusivity, diversity, and the economic, the black-owned companies to participate in the economy as well as in the value chain. I think also in terms of the policy measures, there will also be, we think that there should also be consideration of local content strategy in the debate going forward. The reduction of high barriers to entry to make the industry much more accessible. We think that that should also form part of the debate, as well as common regulatory principles of third-party access to hydrogen networks. I've made this point earlier on. So we think that these are the areas that could also guide the debate going forward. Thank you. We can move on to the next one. I'm sure now, that is all from my side. Thank you very much for the opportunity for us to share, our views and the scope of the regulation, and how from our side also in terms of our playing our regulatory advocacy, what are some of the areas. So I think this presentation has touched on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nomfundo. That was a very informative presentation. I'm happy to see that NERSA is on top of things in terms of the regulatory aspects of things. That's where many things go wrong, and I'm very much happy to see that already taking from the Gas Act, we are in kind of a pound seat in terms of the regulation, and looking at the various aspects that you touched on. I wouldn't want to rehash your presentation, but it was quite informative. Thank you so much. I will meet you again during the Q&A session. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. And the next speaker is Dina Govender. He is a former engineer and an experienced executive with 2 decades of deep automotive industry experience. Having held positions at the BMW Group in engineering development, manufacturing, sales and marketing, customer relations, retail channel development and steering, and new business development in Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Africa, is well positioned to appreciate the entire product and service development life cycle. With his deep and thorough understanding of the complete business chain, he currently represents the BMW Group in the region as head of group communications and political affairs. Dina, over to you.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you to everyone involved in putting together this green hydrogen Indaba today. And thank you also for the opportunity to allow the BMW Group to present our view on the hydrogen economy. I believe also that Minister Mantashe might be in the call, and also Honorable MEC Lesufi. Thank you and welcome, and to all the dignitaries, government officials, and all of you who are joining us virtually today. Good morning. I call you from my hotel room in a very rainy, overcast Munich today, which also goes to show that we have the best opportunities in Africa and in South Africa when it comes to decarbonizing the future in terms of our abundance of renewable resources. The sun doesn't often shine in Europe and in the places where the economies need the energy. So as mentioned, my name is Dina Govender of the BMW Group, and thank you all for offering us this opportunity. We'd like to speak to you today on the hydrogen economy, and in particular on the demand side as users of hydrogen. Next slide, please. So the BMW Group is committed to the COP21 Paris Accord, which committed all of us as human beings on the planet to reducing greenhouse emissions and carbon and decarbonizing our climate and our economies to limit the increase in the global warming to 1.5 degrees. And we are committed to that target as the BMW Group. In so doing, we've set ambitious decarbonization goals for the entire company. We aim to, for example, between now and 2030, reduce our carbon output over the entire life cycle of our cars by 40%. That means 20% in the supply chain by using recycled materials, what we'd like to call the circular economy, reuse of materials such as aluminium, plastic, steel. We also plan to, in the production of our vehicles, reduce CO2 emissions by 80%. And in the use phase, that means when the cars are being driven by customers and end users, by 50%. And in so doing, reduce our overall carbon emissions or CO2 emissions as a company within the next 10 years by 40%. And as a measure of how serious we take these key performance indicators, these key performance indicators or KPIs have been anchored into the performance and remuneration structures of our senior leaders. So the bonuses of our senior leaders are tied to our commitments now to decarbonize and make our contribution to the decarbonization goals of humanity. Next slide, please. So at the BMW Group, we believe that the future is electric, and we will use electricity increasingly produced from renewable sources as a key tool to fight climate change. But we often ask, is one technology really enough to achieve it all? And that would be like standing on one leg, right? Not very stable and not very future-proof as a company which hopes to be around and plans to be around for a long time to come. So we are convinced that an additional energy carrier will be needed in a decarbonized future. And we believe that the answer is hydrogen. And in so doing, we'd like to present our BMW iX5 Hydrogen. Next slide, please. Before we get to the iX5 Hydrogen, let me just talk a little bit about the long history that the BMW Group has with hydrogen as a fuel source and an energy carrier. Whether it was the BMW Hydrogen 7 Series, hydrogen internal combustion engine fleet, which we operated 2 decades ago, and I was quite fortunate enough to be working at the plant in Munich when we were producing the engines for these cars almost 2 decades ago now, or the powering of our production logistics in many of our plants around the world with hydrogen-fueled forklift trucks and power tractors, or very recently, our partnership with a Swedish startup called H2 Steel, which uses hydrogen and green power instead of coal to produce steel for our cars, with the aim being to reduce the CO2 produced in this production process by up to 95%. We have always been committed to hydrogen as a fuel source and energy carrier. And I think as many of you would have heard, and as President Ramaphosa and Minister Patel announced only just recently this week, the South African government has identified 3 key priorities for climate action. Firstly, of course, for Eskom to reduce its carbon emissions. Then for electric vehicles to be produced in South Africa and obviously sold in South Africa, and for the green hydrogen economy to be fast-tracked locally. And I think with those key commitments of the South African state and the South African government to decarbonization, we as the BMW Group consider ourselves to be an important partner all around the world, but also particularly here in South Africa. And we continue to commit to hydrogen as a fuel source and energy carrier. The next slide, please. So talking a little bit about our vehicle products and projects, as BMW, we've always had a holistic and comprehensive sustainability strategy. And sustainability has always been at the top of our agenda for a very long time now. We have already put several great and trend-setting electric models on the market, and we will continue to do so. If you look at the 4 vehicles on the left, the bottom vehicle is our new iX, the previously known as the iNext. I had the opportunity to drive that vehicle yesterday and over the last 2 days in Munich, and it is an absolute technology carrier for the BMW Group. It is a phenomenal vehicle in terms of what it brings to the market in terms of the latest in technology. It's a full electric vehicle that can do 600 kilometers, and we will introduce over the course of the next few months the other cars that you also see on the left of your picture, the new BMW i4, which will come early next year, and the BMW iX3. All of these are battery electric vehicles with ranges of between 450 and 600 kilometers. Of course, building on the great success of our BMW i3, which we launched now almost a decade ago, which is still sold around the streets of the world and is still selling very, very well. By 2030, we expect at least, as I said, 50% of our global sales to consist of fully electric vehicles, and that applies also to a market like South Africa. I always say that South Africans do not get to drive the vehicles we want to. We drive the vehicles that Europeans, Americans, and Asians want, because that's where the market is, right? Those are the requirements and needs that will drive the design of vehicles from all manufacturers in future. And we have to get on board this new decarbonization trend and train, or we'll very soon not be able to enjoy the use of vehicles as we know them, or in particularly in our industrial policy in South Africa, be able to produce the vehicles that we produce at all our plants in South Africa amongst the various OEMs, because increasingly, as we all know, a large majority of those volumes that we produce in South Africa are exported to Europe and Asia and America, and these markets obviously are increasingly going to be demanding electric and alternative drive technology vehicles. So in the long term, we do see an important role for hydrogen vehicles to complement our portfolio of zero-emission powertrains. And this is then our second leg to stand on in the decarbonized future, as I mentioned earlier on. The hydrogen fuel cell powertrain now becomes an important part of the BMW i brand within BMW Group. And after all, a hydrogen car is an all-electric car. You just have the energy that is then stored as hydrogen in a tank instead of electricity in a battery. The next slide, please. So at the heart of the car, the iX5 Hydrogen is the world's most powerful passenger vehicle fuel cell system. Located in the engine compartment, the fuel cell is able to generate and deliver constantly and continuously 125 kilowatts. And this, in combination with the high-powered battery that we have in the car, we can generate a total of 275 kilowatts. That's the performance figure of the car, to ensure that your BMW typical driving pleasure in all situations is maintained. And I'll explain a little bit of the details later on with you and some of the technology. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on the car and where it's positioned. As I mentioned, it forms now part of the BMW i brand that we have as the BMW Group, and several design elements highlight the car's ties to the BMW i brand, as well as to the specific drive technology that the car uses. And typical for BMW, we combine sustainability with technological innovation and world-class engineering. Next slide, please. So the main advantage of a hydrogen powertrain, as I'm sure many of the attendees in the call today will recognize, is fast refueling. Filling up on the hydrogen tank only takes 3 to 4 minutes, and this process is very similar to refueling a conventional vehicle that we all drive today. So there are no limits in terms of range on using the BMW iX5 Hydrogen for long distances, and you get to refuel the vehicle just as you would refuel today a normal petrol or diesel engine vehicle. But we often get questions like, where does the hydrogen come from? And why should we use hydrogen to store energy when there are batteries? And is hydrogen really green? So if we go on to the next slide, please, and you will allow me to share our view of the big picture of hydrogen from a global energy perspective. So from all we know today, electricity alone will not be able to fulfill all the energy needs of our human population. A second energy carrier will be required to complement renewable electricity, and we feel that hydrogen is a very likely candidate to be the second technology, and that second leg, so to speak, that I mentioned early on. And if I could use an analogy, walking on these two legs will help us along the path towards climate neutrality better, faster, and be able to walk along a path towards that goal. But are we the only ones who think like that? And certainly not. In many countries, if we go on to the next slide, please, we have seen hydrogen strategies, roadmaps, or initiatives, and we just have to look at what has happened in the last 6 months, for example. We really appreciate the activities as a company based in Europe of the European Commission and its member states to line up a very concrete pipeline of projects along the entire hydrogen economy value chain. And building the green hydrogen economy will thus be done in a synchronized manner with companies like the BMW Group, end users and consumers, with the state and governments around the world providing the matching regulation that needs to happen to accompany the technology development of companies like the BMW Group, and to be able to match the supply and demand. If you go on to the next slide, when you look at decarbonization strategies and studies worldwide, there is in all of them, an important role for green hydrogen. And the reasons are very simple. Hydrogen, as we all know, can be transported over long distances, and this enables the import of renewable energy. And this is important for many countries. For example, to be able to bring the sun from Australia to Japan, and Africa for Africa into Europe, or the wind from Norway to Central Europe, transport of hydrogen can be done by ship or by pipeline, just like natural gas, for which we have a well-developed infrastructure today. So some of the existing infrastructure can already be reused. And hydrogen can also be stored over long periods of time. And that can help to bring the sun from summer to winter. And last but not least, hydrogen can decarbonize applications which cannot be electrified. For example, powering, one would imagine, a large airplane. And I think that's really important for us to understand as we move into a decarbonized world, as we move into a world where the climate change goals and imperatives are increasingly becoming more important and visceral for us in terms of what we recognize around us. We are going to have to look at ways in which to match the energy supply and energy grids from around the world and store energy. And hydrogen offers us an important technology to be able to do that, to store and shift energy production and usage from different regions and also from day to night. If you move on to the next slide, please. BMW is a very customer-centric organization. For us, it's all about the customer. In addition to wanting to commit to our decarbonization goals as an organization and an institution, we want to also offer each and every customer the powertrain that best fits to the individual mobility needs. For example, today, in all our markets around the world, we offer the ability for a customer to drive a diesel-powered vehicle or a petrol-powered vehicle or a hybrid electric internal combustion engine vehicle or a fully battery electric vehicle. And we increasingly see that we will offer hydrogen as a transmission and drivetrain technology and offer what we'd like to call the power of choice to our customers. We also like to think, and it's quite obvious, but hydrogen cars are powered by fuel cells that are powered by fuel cells are also electric vehicles. The only difference is that the energy is stored as hydrogen instead of electricity. And as I mentioned earlier on, the main advantage is that hydrogen can be refueled in just 3 to 4 minutes, like we do today with any normal internal combustion engine vehicle. And this feature is very important for some of our customers, customers who travel a lot, who need a lot of flexibility. I always say that South Africa is a very large country, and I always comment on the fact that it is 4 times the size of Germany and 3 times the size of France. And so South Africans who have cars will always need to travel a long distance. And I think this is an important aspect of our very varied drivetrain technology to offer this power of choice to our customers around the world. We also have customers who simply just don't have access to electricity for charging. And in offering now an additional leg to our drivetrain portfolio, we are thinking globally here. And the conditions are very different in markets all around the world where the BMW Group is present. If we can move to the next slide, please. So to sum up, let's call it the general environment in which the emerging hydrogen economy finds itself. There is more than one technological answer to all of these challenges of climate change. And we see as the BMW Group a hydrogen economy, number one, in the making in several countries. And number two, as end users of hydrogen, we are convinced that fuel cell electric vehicles can help on the path towards climate neutrality. I'm going to just take a sip of water, if you don't mind. I think just to continue on that story, often in the public debate, it is often reduced to, one word or one line sound bites, and people often speak, or commentators often speak of pure well-to-wheel efficiency. But when you consider the entire life cycle and calculate what we like to call the cradle-to-grave footprint, you will find that electric drivetrain technologies and fuel cell electric vehicle technologies both come out rather equal. And we want to offer more than one choice to our customers to speed up this transition, because then individual needs are better met, and you have a natural demand of customers pulling technologies and pulling different options as they see fit in the markets or the situations they find themselves in. And of course, whatever drivetrain we are working on as the BMW Group, we work hard on the entire value chain, from our suppliers to sourcing raw materials to production in our factories around the world, as well as in the use case of the vehicles with the customers. So if we can go into the next slide, we've talked about the car, the iX5 hydrogen that we have just launched at the IAA, which took place in Munich in September. We've talked about the why. Now let's briefly talk about the how. In the next slide, please. So this is what's inside this beautiful vehicle. I've had also the privilege to see the vehicle a month ago. It is a wonderful, beautiful, desirable vehicle. And inside this vehicle is BMW engineering and everything that stands for. In the engine compartment, we have the fuel cell, which produces, as I mentioned earlier on, continuously 125 kilowatts of power to drive the car. And as far as we know, that's the world's most powerful passenger vehicle fuel cell system that was developed and is on the market today. And this is enough for, of course, Autobahn driving in Germany on the Autobahns here, or hauling a trailer or a caravan in South Africa. In addition to this, in the tunnel and under the rear seats, we have the hydrogen tanks, which hold almost 6 kilograms. That roughly translates to about 160 liters of hydrogen. We have the electric motor that's taken directly from our other electric cars, like the BMW iX, which I mentioned earlier on in my presentation. And on top of that, we have a battery to store the electricity that's regenerated when braking and for boosting when accelerating. And in total, we have pure, typical BMW driving dynamics with a system that delivers 275 kilowatts to drive the car. If we go on our next slide, just a brief look into how hydrogen fuel cells work. I'm sure many of the listeners and participants in today's call will need no real big explanation to this. So this is just a top level overview of how the hydrogen fuel cell works in the vehicle. So we have hydrogen from the tanks, which reacts with oxygen from the air in a very controlled manner. And that's what a lot of engineering hours have gone into over the last 2 decades. Also now in cooperation with our technology partner, Toyota, in this business. And the result is electricity to drive the car. And then the emissions at local use level in the car is just water vapor. And that is the only exhaust. So it sounds simple and intriguing, but I think you can imagine, and I can assure you, this requires many, many good engineers to orchestrate the entire system and bring to the market a product that works perfectly every day, every second in the hands of a customer. And then if we go to the next slide, I think, Program Director, we won't take questions now. I'm glad to take questions later, but there's maybe just one more thing I'd like to share with you. If we go to the next slide, please. A peek a little bit into the further future of the BMW Group and the products we will continue to bring and optimize and develop new to bring to the market. And this is also a little bit of a peek beyond the BMW iX5 hydrogen. We are already thinking about our next generation of hydrogen vehicles. And the key to this will be to design a common architecture for both battery electric and fuel cell electric powertrains to ensure economies of scale and have building block systems that enable better, faster, more economical development and production of these vehicles. And this will enable maximum flexibility to bring a hydrogen powertrain to a market once the conditions are right. So we don't have a lot of, for example, rejigging and retooling to do in our production plants, like our one in Plant Roslyn, BMW Group Plant Roslyn here in Pretoria, in the north of the city center. And of course, this poses a lot of engineering challenges, which we are gladly accepting as the BMW Group, and we are looking forward to tackling it as we do now. I think for now, let's stick with the present, our BMW iX5 hydrogen. If we can move to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, I drove the vehicle a month ago here in Munich. The very first vehicles are already on the road. This year we have done winter testing in Sweden and summer testing in the south of France. And by the end of next year, we will start producing a small series of the BMW iX5 hydrogen for extensive testing and learning, but also for end customers. And it will be fully electric, BMW driving dynamics, zero emissions, and the best part, refueling with hydrogen only takes 3 to 4 minutes. So I think I'm going to stop there. There was a lot of information to bring across. I hope it gives some insight to the participants and also the panelists on the call. We are all going to be part of developing this decarbonized future for our humanity, for our societies. And this is just one way from an end use and a demand side perspective that the BMW Group is looking to contribute to that discussion and also making our contribution to a decarbonized future. I thank you, and to the program director, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Dina. That was a very wonderful presentation. I'm
You're welcome.
a fan of BMW myself.
Glad to know.
And I started being a fan from a very young age. Your presentation just added to my excitement around BMWs.
Glad to
And
hear.
I know that you have this fuel cell electric car that you're launching in Munich. I would have joined you. I was in Munich about 2 weeks ago. I would have made arrangements.
Well, let's keep the discussion going, Prof. You know, we are increasingly working with universities in South Africa. I think our IT competency hubs just developed a new program with the University of Stellenbosch. So please, let's stay in touch. And definitely, I think we, as you said, and the speaker earlier said, you know, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, you walk with others. And we're all going to have to work together in our various roles to make this a reality.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on and then I'll meet you again during the Q&A session. I'm going to introduce Ms. Mita Mhlari. She's our next speaker. Mita is a qualified chartered accountant with over 19 years of professional experience, ranging from energy, infrastructure, investment, asset management, and advisory. She's also the chairperson and co-founder of the Black Energy Professionals Association. Her demonstrated record ranges from being part of the teams that have concluded a first of its kind energy wheeling project with a private power purchase agreement. She has developed wind projects, invested and managed large-scale solar PV projects, and developed and invested in affordable housing. She has also led in the development of many feasibility studies, procurement of public-private partnership projects. She has advised on and managed energy-related strategic integrated projects. She has gazetted these projects were gazetted by the South African Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Council, or what we normally call Infrastructure South Africa. She's part of a team developing a green hydrogen project and has been appointed on the green hydrogen panel by the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. In recognition of her entrepreneurial journey, Mita was awarded the Entrepreneur of the Year award by the African Women Chartered Accountants. She was a panelist at the inaugural South African Investment Conference. Mita was also selected as a woman of fortitude to continue the legacy of Mama Albertina Sisulu. She has successfully completed various international courses, including the Seed Transformation Program through Stanford University Graduate School of Business. I've met Mita in so many forums that deal with energy issues, and I can vouch for this profile that I've just read out. Mita, over to you.
Thank you so much. It is amazing, Professor, and it's lovely meeting you here. And, as we move through our journey of transformation, we are passionate about transformation. And one of the key things that we want to see as we are in this development of hydrogen is that, as Sisno Mfundo has alluded, is that we need to make sure that we have inclusivity when we are developing all of these amazing policies. Inclusivity and transformation needs to be at the core of everything that we do. Thank you very much. And I'm going to be sharing my screen.
Hi, Meta, nothing's been shared. You need to share your screen. So you need to click at the bottom of your screen.
Yes.
So if you click share at the bottom of your screen.
Yes. And then it says entire screen window.
And then, yeah,
Okay.
just select entire screen and make sure that it becomes blue.
Okay. Is it
Okay,
sharing?
there we go. Yeah, and if you can go into full presentation mode for me, please, Meta. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I will
Just go
do
into
that.
full presentation mode and then we'll bring it up.
Okay. Slideshow, not now. What do I do? Okay. Is it working?
Perfect. Please proceed. Thank
Hello?
you.
Can you hear me?
Please, yes, please proceed. It looks good. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just going to be going through in terms of what is happening. I know Sis Nomfundo touched on very extensively on what has been happening from an national front. And I think it's very important for South Africa, if we, in our journey to developing the green hydrogen policies, that we benchmark ourselves and we look at what is happening with the leading countries. Because, I mean, from a South Africa point of view, we want to see ourselves in the tier 1 producers and of hydrogen, and we want to see ourselves producing hydrogen as at the most competitive and cheaply priced, and actually taking over the world. And like we said, I mean, green hydrogen, its different components have been out there, but then the majority of what makes green hydrogen happen, which is the green energy and the resources, South Africa is well embedded in, and we need to see how, in terms of, are we using our resources, as our previous speaker has said, because green hydrogen gives us that opportunity to take this beautiful sunshine and the wind that we have in South Africa to export it internationally. And I'm going to also talk about from a policy related to project development, and the policy related to green hydrogen production, and also ensuring that skills development for a successful green hydrogen in South Africa. And I looked at, I know there's a lot of countries, I did not include Australia here, which is also one of the countries that are trending. And from a production point of view, the key market players, from a production perspective, I looked at Chile, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and the Arab League, in terms of what are their governments doing, and how do we make sure that from a South African perspective, we make sure that we are ahead of the game. In Chile, the Ministry of Energy published the National Green Hydrogen Strategy in November 2020, and its main goal was to promote the transition towards a low-emission economy, turning Chile into a front-runner in the green hydrogen generation and exportation market. Their strategy envisages 3 steps. Stage 1, which is the development of the domestic and industry, development of export markets using production incentives, research and development, infrastructure and supply chain development, and then say stage 2 and 3, which entail the scaling of production, achieving a strong integration in international markets, mainly based on the development of new technologies and the use of green ammonia in industries such as maritime transportation, aviation, and energy storage, amongst others. And when you go into Morocco, Morocco's Ministry of Energy, Mines and Sustainable Development announced in a press release in August 2021 their key objectives of their green hydrogen strategy. Their key strategies include ensuring that they have a cost reduction throughout the entire value chain of the green hydrogen sector, developing local industrial integration of the sector, developing a national industrial cluster dedicated to innovation in the sector, and the development of a national storage plan. And then they also have identified other necessary steps, which include securing of the funding for industry development, development of a national hydrogen market, opening regional research and development centers, and creating a favorable conditions for the export of green hydrogen and its derivatives. And when we go to Saudi, the Saudis, they have the newly developed mega city of NEOM, which is set to become an important global center for renewable energy and green hydrogen. The Saudi government is establishing the NEOM as a special economic zone with an ambition to host 1 million people from around the world. The Arab League, and through the League of the Arab Committee of Renewables, held a meeting in early October to develop a strategy on the green hydrogen. And the meeting discussed the mechanism of implementing the Arab Strategy for Sustainable Energy, which aims to convert waste into energy and produce and produce green hydrogen. So when you look at all these key countries from our own developmental point of view, and when we are creating our own policies, we do not need to also start from scratch. We need to do what other competing countries are doing, but then obviously taking our key advantage in terms of how we are placed to make sure that we are better competitively placed than where these other countries are. And the success of the green hydrogen economy, it lies in a holistic and investor-friendly ecosystem that requires strong collaboration between the public and the private sector participation. And I'm glad that today we are here, me as the private sector, and obviously the minister could not make it, but the NERSA being here, and in terms of all the work that is happening also through the DTIC, the presidency, which is ensuring that South African green hydrogen policy is properly concretized and it actually positioned South Africa as a front runner. We need to make sure that this green hydrogen policy it ensures various incentives and low cost of finance is available for the development of green initiatives. Currently, we have been developing some projects, and I know with my other colleagues who are also on the call, they have been, and one of the key things has been to access the challenge of really accessing that project preparation facilities and making sure that there's a holistic integration, that when you are going to all the different institutions and the DFIs, they really know what we are talking about. And I'm actually happy that the DBSA is here today and the IDC, who we have been working closely in terms of how do we ensure that all this the low cost finance is available. And we may need to make sure that there's a creation of various regulatory and tax incentives to scale production. There needs to be a very concerted effort and the discussion that needs to also be happening from a tax policy perspective with National Treasury and through the DTIC and all the relevant parties in terms of how are we going to make sure, especially looking into the countries that we are competing with, the Saudis and Morocco and all of those, their governments are already developing all the funding mechanisms to make sure that green hydrogen is properly subsidized and incentivized. And we also need to make sure that in this new economy that we are creating, we must make sure that we do not see growth that has happened in our past. We need to make sure that growth is actually accompanied by creation of jobs. So we need to make sure that skills development is at the forefront and at the core of what we are doing. So we need to make sure that the conversation is happening along with the different sectors and industry so that they are relevant material. And with the universities, I had the pleasure of giving a lecture on this green hydrogen economy with the development of UNISA. And we actually need to be saying, how are we setting up curriculum that is actually relevant to the development of this particular industry? And when we are looking at project development, this is now people like me who are actually wanting to develop projects from scratch. What is actually required to make sure that we are incentivizing the development of more projects in South Africa? I looked at the 4 key things that I thought were very relevant and important. The use of carbon pricing, financial assistance towards initial investment, import duties, permitting and licensing from an authorization point of view. As it has been said in my presentation of my profile, I currently sit on the commission on the panel which is advising the Minister of the the DTIC on the commercialization of the green hydrogen. So I actually took some of the work that has been happening there to take an opportunity to share some of the things that have been happening out from a report, the draft report that is due to be released. And I also shared in terms of the IRENA 2020 Green Hydrogen, which is a guide to policy making and International Renewable Agency from Abu Dhabi, in terms of how this can also be, all of this work that have been happening can be shared today. Carbon pricing is a useful tool to guiding investment decisions, especially those that will have long-term impacts. We need to make sure that we are progressively increasing carbon pricing alongside stimulus packages provided by government, which will provide essential confidence for investments. And we have recently seen in Germany, there's been different types of carbon pricing mechanisms that have been introduced, and also from a tax perspective that has been all of those import duties that have been used, that actually makes sure that the gray ammonia matter is actually no longer as effective as it can be. And when we're looking at from a South African perspective, you look at South African carbon tax was introduced in 2019, and this can be used to further incentivize taxpayers to move to green hydrogen sector from a carbon intense one. And we need to have an implicit carbon pricing mechanism, and South Africa should look at repurposing the current fossil fuel subsidies and allocate the funds to cleaner technologies such as green hydrogen. Financial assistance towards the initial investments, like I spoke about, has been a very great challenge to actually developing some of these projects, because most of the corners, they will tell you that it has been too risky. But then actually, when you're looking at it, the world is moving ahead without us. I mean, the single greatest barrier to the production of gas is cost. And currently, they are 2 to 3 times more expensive to produce than grey hydrogen. But then there has been a concerted effort, though, internationally, and also some of the works that have been achieved, I know, in our projects, that has been done to actually make sure that the levelized cost of energy is actually being put up to reduce this cost. But then to achieving these significant levels of expansion, it is envisioned that South African green hydrogen strategy and the capital requirements might be beyond the capability of various project developers. Thus, additional funds from public and private capital sources may be needed, and we need to actually make sure that we are making sure that parties like the DTI, DBSA, and the IDC, that there is instruments that are created from a governmental perspective that make sure that this initial capital barrier is actually achieved. But then from that point of view, there needs to be that clear policy that guides the development of those types of packages. And from an import duty perspective, we need to make sure that we are using this in order, for example, where we have a temporary reduction on a rebate of import duties that can be applied to the importation of the electrolyzers, while we are making sure that our local manufacturing is upended. And permitting, licensing, and authorization. I know one of these days I took a phone call phoning Osum Nomfundo, because we were very confused as well in terms of actually what are the permitting, licensing, and authorizations that are required. But then there needs to make sure that from the DFE, NERSA, and the DMRE, there's a concerted effort within NERSA or a nominated organ that these processes are expedited, and that the information is also readily available for South Africans to know what is available. And one of the key things that are also so from the initial development of the projects that can help as well is to make sure that these green hydrogen projects are also classified and are gazetted as strategic integrated projects, so that they can also be able to benefit from the Infrastructure Act and the Schedule 2 of which actually fast tracks the development of these projects from an EIA and all the other permitting that is required. And when we look at the policy-related development from a low-cost finance perspective, we are saying that innovative financing structures are required to ensure that we have sustainable development in the green hydrogen market. And we need to have a balance between whether government wants to look at some on-balance sheet financing, because when you're looking at the benefit of green hydrogen today, I actually logged on late because for the first 2 to 3 hours of my morning, I was load shedded. So government needs to look at how are they actually using instruments like a green hydrogen to actually ensure the financing of this type of projects through ESCOM, and because these projects ultimately assist that. So you need to have the direct public funding, which includes allocation of taxation revenue, budget surpluses, and borrowings globally to reduce the overall cost of borrowing. You need to maybe look at a mechanism of something called a green project bond financing, because as the world transitions to a net zero economy, financing instruments to support this transition have become more popular through providing long-term grant and concessionary investments to these projects. But then government needs to have a concerted effort of how they consolidated all of these things so that when a private party or a developer is looking for this kind of projects, they're not just going around, running around everywhere without a concerted view of where to go. There needs to be proper, clear public-private partnership that relates to private funding of this. And then, like I said before, the development financiers, they need to leverage funding from developed markets. And a number of development countries have actually set aside or have committed to setting aside funding to supporting the decarbonization of developing countries. And this is one of the key messages that needs to, from a South African point of view, as we go to COP26, as we are actually putting out our commitments to COP26 and to reaching the global emissions targets, that there needs to be developed countries actually needs to support emerging countries in the funding of this project. So I will urge government that it should be one of the key messages at COP26 in terms of how are we making sure that South Africa gets enough allocation to ensure that we are supporting this particular industry. And the possible ways to bridge the gap is making sure we create strong relationship within governments of developed countries who have programs in place to support developing countries in their climate transition initiatives. We need to make sure we are providing partial guarantees. There needs to be some blended concessional finance. There needs to be providing of grants and subsidies to pilot projects. As we have said before, redirecting income from carbon taxes towards green initiatives, issuing government-backed green bonds, and introducing a special levy on carbon fuel, which will generate additional pool of funding for greener initiatives. And when you're looking at the policy aspect for green hydrogen production, we also need to also look at the need and the use of the special economic zone incentives and the tax-related incentives that related to production. And I mean, there has been a talk of the different SEZs that can be looked at. I know that there is the Green Hydrogen Valley in Limpopo that has been looked at, and there's one in the Vaal, and also the Northern Cape as well, with the Boegebaai project. And when you're looking at the enrichment and the potential, I mean, Northern Cape with its potential from both wind and the solar incentives, all of those, you can have a lot of development from a location point of view with tax benefit that can be given from there. And from a market policy and regulation, you need to make sure that we have development of markets of low carbon products that is available for policy tools for early stage market development, which include price premiums. We need to make sure that we have feed-in tariffs or carbon products for difference in prices, which can guarantee a higher price for CO2 emissions. We've seen the work that has been done in Germany, where you have the H2 Global platform there, where projects can actually be allowed to bid within that project, and they are able to actually, the German government actually guarantees you to place your product into the market, and then so that you can get a favorable price. And one of the key things that is very necessary as well is to make sure that there is harmonization with our neighboring countries. For example, what is happening in Namibia, we need to make sure that South Africa is working closely with Namibia to ensure that as a region, there's a regional collaboration to making sure that we are pushing the Southern Hemisphere regional and Southern African regional harmonization from a point of view of making sure that our markets, instead of competing, but then together we are stronger. And then we also need to ensure that there is a mechanism around the guarantees of origin green certification. And we've seen that many countries have introduced the regulatory measures which encourage the increased uptake of renewable energy technologies by means of guarantees of origin. Where the systems have been properly implemented and enforced, they have been known to create a market for the environmental attributes associated with the renewable energy technologies, and they have resulted in increased renewable energy penetration rates. So the principles surrounding an effective green hydrogen, guarantee of origin is traceability, tradability, transparency, and trustworthiness. And when it comes to the issue of making sure that skills development is at the forefront, and when we are putting this at the forefront, we need to make sure how are women and youth are playing an integral role in the development of green hydrogen economy. We always talk about, when they talk about how does the future workforce look like, the green career pathways. We need to make sure that we are assessing the main opportunity for green careers in the local context, while investing in reskilling and upskilling initiatives to meet the current and future skills gaps. We need to make sure that there is a natural capital skills, protecting and monitoring the skills natural resources, including environmentalists, hydrologists, and biochemists. There is the green hydrogen and technical skills that need to be taken into account, the design and maintenance of solar panels, wind turbines, electrolyzers, and other green technologies, sustainable agriculture skills, implementing digital solutions in agriculture, such as organic farming, urban farming, and precision to agriculture, all enabled through data, drone, and DNA technology. There needs to be green architecture for future cities, environmental justice skills, circular economy skills, and the opportunities are vast. But then as we are doing this, we need to have a holistic skills development approach. And the future green hydrogen workforce skill will not only focus on serving the green hydrogen economy, but then should also be able to be flexible enough to service adjacent industries in a holistic manner related to climate mitigation. And ensuring that skills and development for a successful green hydrogen economy, the public and the private sector collaboration is key to ensure that appropriateness of skills are prioritized and then localization opportunities are also realized. We need to make sure that we're incentivizing the private sector to support local capacity. We need to support educational institution activities with the development and funding of training programs focused on the green hydrogen industry. We need to make sure that we are developing an ecosystem and research partnerships to diversify mature skills into other segments of green hydrogen value chain and other industries, thus creating financial incentives for private sector to roll out upskilling initiatives. In closing, my key regulatory recommendations are: we need to have a regulatory development pipeline. We need to prepare a regulatory development pipeline which details the timing of the review of the relevant law and or including the expected date of the proclamation of the laws based on action outlined on the commercialization roadmaps. We need to ensure that we outline the timed regulatory responses for the green hydrogen industry in alignment with anticipated technological and commercial developments. We need to make sure that we develop regulatory objectives. Agreeing on this objective would simplify coordination of regulatory responses across government departments. We need to ensure that there is an integrated stakeholder management and advocacy processes that are in place in order to align public and private sector opinions and inputs. We need to make sure that we develop a set of regulations that are aimed at creating an environment for green hydrogen, which will support the green hydrogen export market. We need to look at utilizing Section 19.1 of the National Energy Act to introduce regulation that regulate and support South Africa's green hydrogen economy and include measures and incentives designed to promote the production and consumption incentives and research. We need to consider other existing laws and policies that could support the uptake of the green hydrogen. We need to develop green hydrogen standards and specification related to production, storage, transportation, and end-use application based on international standards and best practice. We need to ensure that there is an enabling environment for green hydrogen in introducing measures for SEZ to produce and export green hydrogen at a cost-competitive price, design and introduce a guarantee of origin system to install investor confidence in key import nodes, and we need to ensure that we have regulatory measures that support the green hydrogen by introducing explicit and implicit carbon pricing mechanism coupled with green hydrogen revenue and recycling mechanism, build on existing regulatory tax incentives to support green hydrogen value chain, and introduce a single institutional body to expedite licensing processes and facilitate the development of the Green Hydrogen Center. And with that, I thank you very much. And I would like to say to my colleague, I will be in Germany in the next 2 weeks, and I would like to be test driving that BMW. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mita. It's always refreshing listening to you. I was listening and summarizing everything that you were saying. And in the end, I wrote down that you basically advocating for an enabling environment. That for me is basically what you are doing, and you're doing it very well. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Test drive the BMW for me as well. I'll meet you in the Q&A session in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. We're running a bit behind time because we started a bit late due to the technical glitches that we had. We also have apologies from people like the Minister of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and MEC Panyaza Sufi that I forgot to mention. Okay, I'm told it's Q&A now. Yes, I was moving much faster than the BMW. So we'll go to the Q&A session. There are questions that I'm going to read out, and some of the questions seem to be repeating, so we may skip them or just read them out again. The first question that I see here is, what are the obstacles NERSA had faced in regulating the already available renewable energy technologies such as solar, which can be avoided when introducing hydrogen into the market? So I think this goes to Nomfundo.
Thank you, Prof. in terms of the obstacles, there aren't really tangible obstacles, except that there are concerns with regards to the cost of renewables. So that has been the source of a great concern. And however, if you look at the latest bids, you will see that the cost is coming down. So and that is also because of the improvement in technology. So that's one way of looking at it. But the second thing that we have observed as well is the issue of the capital structure of these projects when the companies submit their bids. What then happens is that sometimes they will go for 100% equity. Then later on, they will change that capital structure and take more debt than equity. And by so doing, then they will be saving massive costs to the initial investment. Then what you would want then to see is whether the cost savings, it cascades down now into the tariffs and what consumers are going to pay. So what we have seen with some of the companies that they have duly come before NERSA asking for changes in the tariffs voluntarily so that they can be able to, they've indicated the changes and also the cost savings and ensuring that those cost savings are actually seen in the tariffs themselves. So those are the things that we have seen. And also sometimes during the course of establishing the project itself, at the time of commissioning the projects, you will see that there has been some changes in the technology itself. Then once then there are some of those changes, then they also approach NERSA and then
I think Nomfundo, I think you've got a network. Oh, she's got a network problem. I hope it's not load shedding.
I was about to say the same thing.
Load shedding, right?
I hope it's not load shedding.
Yeah. It is load shedding. It has started some 40 minutes ago, so I'm hoping that the battery will still carry me through. I'm using other devices to stay connected.
Okay. Now, thank you for that.
All
I
right.
think you provided quite a comprehensive answer there. The second question also was directed to you, but I think this was partly covered in your presentation. And it goes like, is the hydrogen regulatory process already in place at NERSA or is still under development? Maybe in 1 second, because I believe you've covered this during your presentation.
Indeed, Prof, I have covered it in the presentation. We have a regulatory framework in the Gas Act, and like we have it in other countries. By the way, our Gas Act is also based on the regulatory principles in Europe. So during the renewables project by the IPP office, they've done an audit on the sufficiency of the Gas Act. So they were quite comfortable. So it will just be maybe some improvements depending on how we want to frame the development of this energy carrier.
Thank you. Then the next one, I'm going to try and answer this one myself. It says, can the Hydrogen Indaba team meet with NERSA to take the sector coupling idea forward? I think the answer to that question is yes. The team can meet with NERSA and take that issue forward. I'll move to the next question. It goes like, Mr. Governor, will you be manufacturing the fuel cell power trains in South Africa? Dina, are you here?
I am still here. Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, properly.
Yeah, apologies. Something seems to have gone wrong with my camera on my iPad. I cannot blame Eskom. This is something else that has happened, but at least you can still hear me.
Yes,
so I will take
very
the
well.
question.
You can proceed to answer.
I think, what we shouldn't forget is that BMW, like many industrial companies, are for-profit companies. And we are represented globally. We manufacture manufacturer globally. BMW has 40 production facilities that make vehicles around the world, of which a very key jewel in our crown is our BMW Group production plant in Roslyn, in the north of Tshwane. And I think what we shouldn't forget is that these technologies are hellishly expensive to develop. And they rely a lot on, number one, demand. So demand has to be there. And secondly, on the necessary infrastructure and legislative framework to enable such facilities to be built. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of euros, multi-billions of rands to develop such a facility. And I think our next what could I say? Our next strategic approach for our BMW plant in Roslyn is to enable the local manufacture of batteries. I think that's the key topic for us as the next industrialization policy and strategic objective. It's not just our objective, it's the objective of all the OEMs who manufacture vehicles in South Africa, primarily because we export most of these vehicles, and the export markets in 10 years' time are not going to be wanting internal drive engine cars. And to be quite clear, that is our next policy objective, which we work together with, helping shape that policy or inform that policy together with governmental entities and other industry partners. The fuel cell manufacturing right now is, as I mentioned, our second leg. And it is not the high priority right now, but we continue to work on it as a company.
Thank you. The next question is also directed to you, Gina. It goes like, Mr. Govender, could you share more about the workings of the BMW hydrogen/electric vehicles, startup time, charging times, and operating it by the consumer? I think you've touched on some of these, so in 2 seconds,
Yes.
maybe you can respond to that.
I'll keep it very short. Your hydrogen-fueled vehicle, whether you burn it in an internal combustion engine vehicle or a fuel cell to generate electricity, you have no difference to how you fuel a car up today. With battery electric vehicles, depending on the size of the battery, charging time could vary from a few hours to 45 minutes, depending on the type of charger you have.
Thank you. So the next question, I think, Nomfundo, it's directed to you. You have partly answered the question during your presentation, okay? And it says, when is the Gas Act being reviewed to initiate decarbonization of the gas grid? You have touched on this when you looked at the various options available for transportation of the gas with the gas pipelines and hybridization and things like that. In 1 minute in 1 minute, can you respond to that?
Okay, two things. The first one is that the amendment to the Gas Act is already before Parliament. There will be public hearings. I think they're starting on the week of the 16th of November. I can't remember, but I think the committee has already communicated with the members of the public. So I think it will be an opportunity maybe to make representations before Parliament in that regard. I think it's upon the stakeholders that have attended this event today to then participate in those public hearings. But again, I think what is important again is the policy direction, because if you want to have any changes in the law, those changes must be influenced by the policy objectives and the strategy. So there are those two things, but I leave it that to the stakeholders as to how they are going to engage with policy makers as well as the legislature in that regard. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next question goes to you, Dina. I think you've answered partly this question. It says, is BMW using fuel cells that utilize platinum group metals? If so, is BMW planning to manufacture them in RSA, as well as investing in R&D in local tertiary institutions? I think you've answered partly this question, and you've mentioned Stellenbosch University. I'm very proud of that as well.
Yeah, I think a quick answer, yes, to the question. We do use platinum group metals. We are investing a lot now, not just at the University of Stellenbosch, but in programs with tertiary institutions. We see it as a large part of our transformation and diversity agenda that we have to push as a company now, that we also look at education and working with institutions of higher learning. So it's not just your university, Prof, but with multiple universities around the country. And yeah, I answered the question around manufacturing early on.
Okay, thank you. Nomfundo, this question, you just answered it partly again, but I'll give you another opportunity if you want to add something quickly. It says, Ms. Masetti, when will the 2021 Gas Amendment Bill become law, and will it adequately regulate all aspects?
Thank you. I've already covered that question. The department has already introduced the bill into Parliament. So it is now before Parliament. The Parliamentary Committee will start with public hearings. So members of the public, interested stakeholders, including potential investors, even for the hydrogen, they have the opportunity to make their views known to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one is a comment. I think we're not going to go into that one. So thanks, colleagues. I think those will be all the questions that came through from what I can see. And I'm asking also the technical team to just confirm that I've gone through all the questions. Then if that's the case, then can we then move quickly to the next speaker, who will be basically doing a summary of what we've had today. That speaker is Olympus Mantata from the DBSA. Olympus' current role as head of climate finance at the Development Bank of Southern Africa includes the management of climate financing mechanisms that the DBSA is accredited to. Such include the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, and the Green Climate Fund, GCF. Olympus has been the fund manager for the SA Green Fund that the DBSA manages on behalf of the Department of Environmental Affairs. He has been instrumental in assisting the DBSA to obtain the GEF accreditation as a first national agency to do so, and further contributed to the successful accreditation of the bank by the GCF. He also contributed to the establishment and implementation of South Africa's National Green Fund, where he oversaw the commitment and disbursement of over 1 billion rand worth of debt, grant, and mezzanine financing into high-impact investment projects, which are realizing significant social, economic, and environmental returns. His 26 years experience includes working as an investment professional within the development finance arena, the technology or innovation commercialization space, and various facets of the engineering environment as business development manager, engineering manager, and commercial manager. Olympus, over to you for the summary of the proceedings today.
Thank you very much, Prof. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be part of these discussions. I think it has really been very rich and useful deliberations that we have had. I think we are privileged to have the kind of speakers that have taken part in the discussions today. So my role is quite challenging to try to condense the very important points that have been raised. But I think for me, just as a start, I think we are agreed that if we are to reach this ambition of reaching net zero by 2050, to avoid the climate crisis that are clearly projected through the IPCC report, all sectors will need to look at how they transition to low carbon operations, but also looking at their value chains. And I think an example is what Dina would have talked to from a BMW point of view, the ambitious targets that have been set. And I really like how they've segmented them into the supply chain targets, production, and use of user face. I think that is the way to go, and I think it's an important way for organizations to start looking at this, reaching these targets. And I think importantly also looking at how they incentivize and ensure that they're reflected through KPIs of their senior management to really drive this important matter. So I think it's quite encouraging to see that. But having said that, I think it is also clear from the discussion that for hard to abate sectors, it can be quite challenging to be looking at achieving these targets. And I think that's where the hydrogen economy really come up, or the hydrogen technology in assisting industries and various sectors to reach these targets. You would have heard again from Dina talking about the steel production that they've started initiating using green hydrogen within BMW, which is again a quite encouraging task. But however, green hydrogen to play this role appropriately and effectively, you need to be looking at the role of regulations and policy development. And this has to be appropriately timed, and it has to be targeted policy and regulatory interventions if we are to see this kind of movement that we are talking about. And I think in that regard, it was quite encouraging to hear from Nomfundo what is happening, especially on the NERSA side. I think she mentioned importantly leveraging on the existing Gas Act as a base upon which we can start building these important interventions. I think she also mentioned the importance of looking at the adequacy of where this stands with the view of exploring the gaps that are there and addressing the gaps. And I think with that, there was also important things that she mentioned to say it needs to be done with a lens of saying how do we do it in a way that we improve even our transformation initiatives, BE issues, and also she mentioned the importance of saying as a way of transitioning, how do you do this without limiting yourself just to green hydrogen and looking at other, forms of hydrogen, I believe in a transitional manner to ensure that there's a responsible transition. So I think that is quite important. But I think the other important matters from a policy point of view that needs to be looked at is really, how we use this to start de-risking, especially, maybe your large-scale projects through the use of subsidies, tax credits, loan guarantee schemes. And I think if you listen carefully to Mita's presentation, she touches a bit of that. And I think one other important thing is really creating demand pull through procurement requirements, looking at things like starting to address reliable offtakes. And I think, again, if you looked carefully at Mita's presentation, she would have touched at components of that. And there's also the question of creating standards to encourage widespread use of hydrogen. I think both Nomfundo and Mita touched on important components around that. And I think if you look at the combination of these initiatives, they could act as an important intervention to start, providing support that drives the price of hydrogen down to a level where we can start getting market forces to take over. So policy and regulatory interventions could also play a significant role in addressing, the important issue around the cost competitiveness barrier. So I think, again, Mita touched on the use of offsets, to talk to the higher cost of production. The support across the hydrogen value chain, quite key to reduce deployment cost. And this is key if we are to look at accelerating the inflection point of hydrogen becoming cost competitive. Of course, with policy, there's issues around, how we start addressing support for R&D and commercialization initiatives. I think those were touched on even with Dina's presentation, but I guess also, with the other two presentations that we had. And of course, there's also the important component of how, policy drives the knowledge infrastructure. There was talk around the guarantee of origin and production certification schemes that are quite key, I believe. Validation and verification schemes, quite important. Safety standards mentioned, I think, quite key. I think both in Nomfundo and Mita's presentation, we have seen, how that should be deployed to drive this important initiative. I'm really trying to touch at the high-level points of what was presented, but I'm also trying to use the limited time to really talk about, financing this green hydrogen economy. Especially, my understanding would be that the next edition of these sessions could potentially be talking to the financing part of it, and I hope this will just create some, introduction to that. So, there's much talked about target of installing at least 100 gigawatt capacity by 2030. And, this is quite an ambitious target, which will, obviously require immediate policy support for rapid scale up. But more importantly, it will require significant and appropriate funding support. And I think organizations like ourselves and various other DFIs, are quite key in the, mobilization of this significant amount of funds that are required for these initiatives. So, public finance, is quite important, but alone it would not be, sufficient to move the needle. So, it would be important to look at how you leverage on it to really, bring in other sources of funding. So massive scaling up is needed to unlock additional financing resources and foster a sustainable, development pathway in this area. So I would believe that, bulk financing would thus be expected, especially from, private sector. And to do this, there have to be an understanding of, how you design, risk return arrangements that can attract this sort of funding. And with this, I think we talked about the importance of the regulatory and policy issues today. And we also talked about the enabling environment. And I think also key is really, the demonstration of political will by removing policy uncertainty. And it is quite encouraging, I think, at this point to see that there's concerted effort in that regard. And therefore, with this, your DFIs plays an important role in leveraging private investment, And one of the reasons is because, the relationship exists between DFIs with a private sector where, historically there's been co-funding in such initiatives. And also, I guess, the proximity of your DFIs to government offers an opportunity to influence policy in such a way that it creates the set enabling environment. But I think the other important thing that I wanted to talk about is really, the importance of DFIs in channeling these financial resources, but even more importantly, mobilizing climate resources from your climate financing mechanisms. I think it was mentioned in the intro that, ourselves, DBSA, we are accredited to both the Global Environmental Facility and the Green Climate Fund. I think it is important to look at, a programmatic way of, significantly accessing these resources, which we can then use to really de-risk, various projects and use them to crowd in private investment. But even, importantly, I think Mita mentioned the importance of, project preparation interventions. And, these financing mechanisms also offer such facilities which we can, I believe, access and use to, on a large scale, start developing these projects in a programmatic manner. And I think this would really allow us to be able, especially as a country, to access significant resources. I think one of the presenters talked about the importance of ensuring that especially climate resources that are made available to support developing countries are, accessed from a country point of view. There was reference to, COP26 and the significant emphasis that is being put on this COP as a finance COP, with the view of ensuring that there's a significant funding coming from developed countries to support developing countries. And I think we are better served as a country to ensure that as this happens, we are best positioned to access these resources. And I think the other thing that I would like to talk to is the importance of transformation as we do this. I think we've seen, even with the IPP program, where there's effective financing mechanisms in place to finance large projects, but translating this to your smaller projects becomes a bit of a challenge. You start to experience constraints around the participation of SMEs. It might, in many cases, be because of limited access to funding. Many times there will be a talk about limited track record. Again, cost effectiveness of being able to, transact where small transactions are concerned. The issue around big costs that are sometimes disproportionate to the investment returns to be achieved. Sometimes legislative process and requirements that are a bit onerous for your small players. And I think in developing innovative approaches, especially from a funding point of view, all these have to be, looked at. I think from a DBSA point of view, one of the things is really, the pragmatic approach that I've talked to, with the view of really looking at a standardized approach. It'd be from a contracting point of view. It'd be from, just simplifying the process such that it's a lot more predictable. Thus, making it easier for participation by, your SMEs in the space. And I think all these important factors has really been touched on in the various presentations that we have had today. And I think if we take this comprehensive approach to this important sector, I think we have a good chance that we will learn from previous mistakes and do better, especially where the hydrogen economy is concerned. And I think from our side, from a DBSA point of view, we're really looking at making sure that, from a financing point of view, we provide, solutions, starting from project preparation, transitioning projects to bankability, ensuring that we provide a platform that would encourage collaboration by various funders to ensure that this important sector is fully supported. So thank you very much. So that was my attempt to try to summarize the very rich presentations that we have had from the various speakers. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay, thank you so much, Olympus. You did a very wonderful job of summarizing, and I like the fact that you went further to tell us that funding is not going to be a problem. So we will be knocking on your doors, especially the project preparation funding, which is the difficult one, especially for young Black people when they want to access various markets. Thanks a lot for that. Before I call on the next speaker, Mr. Romano, I just want to indicate about the hydrogen the program that we have developed at Stellenbosch University. So we worked with the GIZ, and then they funded the development of a master's program. So that master's program comes with a number of what we call short courses that people can attend and earn CPD points. The GIZ funded the development of the program, and they are funding the bursaries. I just checked with the person who's running the program. Unfortunately, the closing date for the bursaries has passed, but we will see what we can do in terms of accommodating people into short courses and earning CPD points as part of the skills development in the sector. I'll get more information from the person who is running this and then share with the team, and then the team can share with the rest of the people who are in attendance. I'm going to call Mr. Romano to do some 5 minutes closing remarks. I think we did well in terms of time, looking at the time that we started. So around 11:36, we should be closing. Mr. Romano, over to you.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you for a very well-structured, well-run, professional episode 4. Could I just ask the platform presenters to put the slide and the next slide, please, which is the comments that I want to make before I make the announcements. The slide on the screen is from my research and studies of several years now, summarizes the formula for personal, for organizational, and for societal success. I call it the belief, action, reality, infinity loop. As you believe, so you act. As you act, so you become. as you become, so you create reality in consonance with those beliefs. Many of you would be familiar with the statement that anything is possible to those who believe. And I think in our quest to create a hydrogen future, we start with that belief. And what we have been doing in these past 4 episodes is to start acting on this belief of creating a hydrogen future. And we'll keep reviewing as we get inputs, as we get ideas, and update our actions and our beliefs around creating a hydrogen future. So this is, in my view, a very, very important formula for success. I have used it in my career. I'm using it in business, and I'm translating it now. And we together are translating it now into creating a new culture for our society of a cleaner, of a more sustainable society for the future of our children. I think I'd like to briefly then mention that episode 5, which is the funding of the hydrogen economy and its transition, is on course. We have a few international speakers that have confirmed participation. And we also have, for those that may want to come on board, we have Bloomberg. They have indicated that they want to join the team that we are putting together, which includes our DFIs, the DBSA, the IDC, the Department of Trade and Industry, and we also waiting for confirmation from the Minister of Finance. They came back to us this week and informed us that our request is being considered, and we hope to be able to finalize that. I'm hoping that by tomorrow that would have been sorted out and finalized. I think for me and the team, we are truly grateful that we have been able to pull together the teams that have participated, the speakers, the quality of the speakers that we have had so far, and the participants that have been with us from the beginning all the way through now. We're getting some very, very positive feedback from some of you out there. And we are working to make sure that some of the ideas that have been put together are developed so we can implement, for instance, the women in hydrogen, the youth in hydrogen suggestions that we have received. And truly from our side, we just want to thank all of you for being part and parcel of creating a future in which hydrogen will be the predominant energy carrier, energy source for a sustainable society. To the chair, to the program director, the discussant, and the speakers, and the Hydrogen Indaba admin, and the platform providers, thank you for all your amazing work that you continue to do to make the Hydrogen Indaba the preeminent and place for discussions on the hydrogen economy future. All the best, and until next time, see you then.